in here. Morning, everybody that's joined us on our Facebook feed and YouTube. I'm glad we're able to have that. Welcome to join in with us. And we're moving a little farther into our book of Genesis study. And we've covered so much material. And today's lesson, moving farther into the study on Jacob's life. Didn't know we'd be studying Jacob this many weeks, but he's got an extensive history to his life, and so glad we're able to get through it. But Jacob is a key character. We think of Abraham a lot before we do Jacob sometimes, just because Abraham seemed to be the father of this whole thing. But Jacob is to me one of the key pieces, and I think it's because Jacob's life is a great picture of what everybody goes through in their life, and especially those who struggle with their experience coming to God, coming to Christ. And so today's lesson to me is good for anybody. It's especially good for those of us who are already saved and know what salvation is. But this lesson in particular could really be helpful to somebody who's not saved yet. Maybe somebody who's sitting on the fence of whether they ought to give their life to God or not. Because Jacob is a good picture of someone who struggles with being humble and submissive. We've already seen through his childhood and early adulthood how he's so deceitful, full of trickery. He's a schemer. His whole name, his name Jacob, means deceiver. So we see from his birth, through his time as a younger brother to Esau, and stealing the blessing and the birthright. And then we've, of course, studied the last week or so about him going to his uncle Laban to live there. He has these multiple wives and multiple children. There's all kinds of deceit within the family. And Jacob himself still cannot get past this selfishness that's inside of him. This drive to have control over everything, to just have anything he can get. And there's not much submission in him, in his character. And there's not any recognition, really, that he's going to have to rely on God for a blessing. It's always, that sounds great, but what can I get out of it? And when we think about people who live, especially an adult life, without God in it, that seems to be the case with those people usually. What can I get out of it? What's in it for me? What makes me happy? I don't want to have to change the way I live or the things that I think or the things that I do because I'm going to have to submit to some God. And so they struggle and wrestle with that all the time. Well, this really isn't in our lesson, but it's in reading and in listening to others. I came to this same thought over and over. Is we're going to read today about Jacob wrestling with a man in the middle of the night. We're going to find out that this man is God himself. But before that, just the thought I had, as I mentioned, is we are all being wrestled for by Satan. When we started the beginning of our study, we saw how Satan tricked Adam and Eve, and that God pronounced a fatal blow on Satan that one day he would be ultimately destroyed. And ever since then, Satan's made it a goal to say, that's fine, but I'm going to take just as many of your people that I can with me, and I'm going to make it so difficult for them so that they'll reject you. I'll find ways. I'll trick them. I'll put in their minds selfishness. I'll put in their minds arrogance and pride so that they won't want to follow you, God. And so I believe that these stories we're studying and reading here and throughout the whole Bible are pictures of that. Satan getting inside of people's heads and hearts and drawing them to stick with him and rather than rather than follow and honor God. So this is just another picture of that, but this picture, this story in particular though, just gives a great picture of the struggle that man has with that decision. And some people go through it for years. You know, I mean, you probably know somebody right now. I can think of 3 or 4 on top of my head that I know they're good people. They want to live a morally good lifestyle. They're not mean. They're kind to others. They actually show love and kindness towards others. But they will not come off of the complete control over their lives and give it to God. And if you ask them about it or present the gospel to them, try to tell them about Jesus, they'll say, I don't want any part of that. Or one day I'll take care of that. There's no final desire to just hand over the keys to their life over to God. And so as we read today, just kind of have in your mind that thought that Satan is really ruling Jacob's life here still. And it's the same struggle that people go through. So like I said, encouraging those that are not saved, that are listening on their online, or if you know somebody, this is a great picture, a story to present to them so that they can understand what turning your life over is like. All right, so we're going to actually work in chapter 32, and the title of the lesson is Wrestled. And Jacob's going to have a wrestling match here. We're actually going to start at the beginning of the chapter, though, because it's only 32 verses, and I don't want to leave anything out. Remember last week we left off where Jacob has asked Laban, his uncle, say, let me go. I'm going to take all these wives I have and my 11 sons, my kids, and we're going to leave. And so they leave, and this is some time has passed. He and Laban have worked out a deal, and they're still trying to get the best of one another. So anyway, he is traveling back to his homeland, Jacob is. And in verse 32, we're picking up, and all this while he's traveling, what do you think is the person he's got on his mind? Anybody got a guess? He's going back home now. Esau, that's right. That's the one name. He still had never made peace with Esau. And he's wondering, what's going to happen when I go back? That whole fleeing to Uncle Laban was to save his life. He was trying to save his neck. And now he's got to go back and face him. And this is the one thing that he hadn't considered. How am I going to do this? He's got all these animals, all this livestock. He's been blessed but with all kind of possessions. But he's still got a problem when he goes back home, the one that he ran from. So let's start in verse 1 of chapter 32. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp, and he called the name of that place Mahanaim. So here Jacob has had a visual of God's angels here. And so here's the second time he's having an encounter. Remember the first time he had the encounter when he slept on the rock and he saw the angels up and down the stairways, the Jacob's ladder and the stairway story, and he called that name Bethel, place of God. Here he sees here's another place where he sees God's angels. In verse 3, then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, and he commanded them, saying, speak thus to my lord Esau, thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. So what he's done is he said, I need you to go find Esau and tell him that I'm coming, that I've got some possessions and wealth, I've been blessed, but I'm coming back home, and I'm hoping I can find favor with him. Go see how things are. Go see if he's still upset with me. Go see how mad he is. And if he finds out how that I'm coming home and this is going to end badly, then we gotta back up and punt. We gotta get another plan. So it says, verse 6, then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him. Well, Jacob's going to probably panic now. Wait a minute, what's he coming with 400 men for? And he's thinking, I am doomed. He's scared. All right, so Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 companies. All right, so he says, what am I going to do? We're going to have to save our lives somehow. And he comes up with the best plan that he can think of is, okay, I'm going to split all my family into two groups. That way, if they annihilate half of us, the other half can still survive maybe. Wouldn't you want to be the group that was put in the front? So he basically says, all right, you go here and you go here. And he's splitting them up. And it says there, verse 7, so Jacob was greatly afraid. We already read that. Let's go down to 8. And he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. Okay, so let's stop. So look what's happened all of a sudden. Jacob has reached a place and he has gotten to something that he can't fix on his own. There's no way to deceive out of this. He is boxed in. He's left Laban. He's headed back home. There's no other place to go. He's having to make a choice. And the only thing he knows how to do is just divide and try to conquer. So what does he do when he's in the most desperate place he's ever been? He's loaded with possessions, but that's not going to get it. You can't fix this with a bunch of animals. So what's he do? He prays. He did exactly the right thing. But think about how this applies to a person's life. When does a person usually cry out to God? When they're in the most trouble. When there's nothing left. When they've got no other resources of their own and no strength on their own, and they're down at the bottom, that's when they're going to cry out to God. And that's what he's doing here. He says, O God of my father, Abraham, and God of my father, Isaac. Notice he didn't say, my God, the God of my father and my grandfather. Didn't say, my God. He's still not there yet. And he says, you told me to go back. I'm doing what you asked me to do, but I need you to deliver me from the hand of my brother Esau. So he's scared. He asks for help. And he's doing exactly what he ought to do. He is being broken down. Okay? Now we go back up a little bit to verse 3, and I want you to notice it says the land of Edom, because Esau was the leader of this land of Edom. And there's someone who came much later from the land of Edom. That was Herod. King Herod was an Edomite. So if you ever heard in Old Testament teaching that the break in the old Israelite nation started with Jacob and Esau, they've been fighting ever since, and they're still fighting today. Here's where it begins. Herod was an Edomite. Esau went the other direction. Jacob's line followed God. Okay, so in verse 11, deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. Names himself first. Not he'll attack my family and kill me after. He's worried more about his own skin. Puts himself first still. Verse 12, for you said, I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he's sitting there thinking, you told me that I was going to be the father of these many nations. Well, if I get killed here and all my family gets killed here, this doesn't work out. And so he's making his bargain with God, saying, look, he's presenting his defense, and he's laying it at God's feet, saying, you said come back here. You said you were going to bless me. You said we were going to have a huge nation from my family. And I need you to deliver this. I need you to work this out. Doesn't this sound like a person who is struggling with following Satan and following God? That same person wrestles back and forth. It's like a tug-of-war match. And maybe some in here or others that's watching that are saved can remember that tug-of-war match you had with God, whether you're going to follow God or follow Satan. Some people, they see it and they jump right on it and they say, I can't resist that. God's the best deal there is. But others don't do that. They have to work their way through it. They have to find their place at the bottom of the heap till they finally go, I've got to have that. I can't survive without him. I can't do it on my own. And so he says in verse 13, so he lodged there at the same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau. Okay, so here he in verse 12 and 13, he's finished his prayer and he's decided, okay, I'm going to come up with one more plan. And the plan is, I'm going to try to bribe my brother. If he's mad at me, I'm going to take all these animals I have and give him a bunch of them, and maybe he'll be okay with me. I stole his blessing. I stole the birthright. I ran for the hills. For 20 years he's been over here sulking, waiting for his revenge. Maybe if I give him a bunch of gifts, that'll fix it. Okay, so watch what happens in verse 14. Here's what he's planning to give him. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels with their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 foals. Then he delivered them into the hand of his servants, and every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass over before me and put some distance between successive droves. In other words, you guys go in sections. Don't everybody go at once. All right, and he says, and he commanded the first one, saying, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, they are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he is also behind us. So he commanded the second, third, and all that followed drove, saying, in this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. Okay, so it says he split up his family into two groups. He split up all these gifts into different droves, different groups. They're supposed to go one at a time. And it says when this is all over with, he's alone. You see there in verse 21? So the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. He stayed by himself. Now, it doesn't give us any indication as to why he decided to stay by himself. But I'm glad that it worked out this way in God's will, that he was by himself. Because often when a person winds up coming to God, it's because they are alone. They have reached a place that no person and no thing and no object can fix their problem. And when they're by themselves and they figure out nothing else is going to fix this, and they're alone with their thoughts. They're alone with their conscience. And if they open their heart and ears and minds and eyes, they'll be able to realize they're not really alone. They're with God. And so that's what happens, and your text starts with verse 22. So we'll start reading there. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone. And a man, notice the capital letter, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. All right, so let's catch up. He sent the family across the brook there, and he's by himself. And it said, a man wrestled with him all night. Not just a little while, all night long. He wrestled with this man. And the man in my scripture text is capitalized. Now, we're not told who that man is, but we can already begin to tell just by the grammar. But as we read further, we begin to see exactly who it is. Now, when he, capital letter, saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip. So, in other words, God incarnate, a pre-version of Christ, is a physical person that is wrestling with Jacob. It's not a ghost. It's a man. You can physically touch him, it says. So he's wrestling with this man, and it's not just a little while, and he works him over, and I'm telling you, they go at it, and they wrestle for hours. And Jacob doesn't give up, and neither does the man. But it says, the man wrestled with him until the breaking of day, and when he saw that he did not prevail against him, in other words, when God here realizes that Jacob is not going to give up, that's when he decides to do something unique. He touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint. So God took a place on Jacob and said, I'm going to break you because you're not going to let go of me, and I refuse to let go of you. And so here's the place. I've finally, after all these years, worn you down, and I've got you by myself, and you're just about to give up, and I'm going to put something on you so that you will never forget this moment. And he touches his hip and pulls his hip out of socket. And so at that moment, he says to him, let me go, for the day breaks. This is all that night. And so God says, let me go. But Jacob answers back and says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Now this verse has a lot hidden in it, and I try to just sum it up in just a sentence or so. Jacob got a blessing from his dad. He's been seeking the blessing from God. And all these years have gone by, and even though God has blessed him with things, Jacob needed something in particular. He needed God to bless him personally. You notice a while ago that Jacob didn't say, my God. It said, the God of my father and grandfather. Here, and he says, I need you to bless me. He's wanting him to say, I want to know who you are to the point that I call you my God the way my dad did and my granddad did. And so he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Now this tells us right here that God is bringing him to a crossroad in his life. And he's saying, if you want to know who I am, and if you want me to bless you, I need you to realize who you are so that I can let you know who you're going to be. And so verse 28, he says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Now what he's saying there is, your name is Jacob. He asked him, tell me your name. My name is Jacob. Jacob knew what his name meant. It meant deceiver. Your name has been deceiver for all these years because that's what you've done. You have deceived people. You've cheated people. You've been selfish. You've been greedy. You've been arrogant. You've been sinful. And he says, when you ask me to bless you and you hang on to me the way you have, then now all of a sudden I'm realizing you have reached a new point in your life and you're ready to be different. You're ready for this blessing, and the blessing is going to come in the form of his name. So he says there, you'll no longer be called Jacob anymore because we've wrestled all night long and you have finally reached a place where you're not going to let go in stubbornness, but the thing that you're not going to let go of anymore is going to be me, not yourself. And so he names him Israel, and by giving him a new name, he's giving him a new identity, a new personality, a new person. And so he calls him Israel, which means to struggle with God and prevail. This is what the whole nation of Israel's history would be like, struggling with God and in the end sticking with him. Even though they wandered away, they stick with God. They never said, we'll never be with God. They stick with him. Even though they screw up and they make mistakes and they stray away, they still say, I'm going to stay with God. Now that's the life I live. Even though I said one day, I want to be a Christian, I want to go to heaven, I want to follow Jesus, I want God to be my Savior, I want him. I don't want Satan, I want God. I still go mess up every day. I'm still sinful, but every day I get up and go in my prayer, I choose you again, God, because I've chosen you every day since that day one. When I chose you, I choose you again, and I choose you again. And that's what he's saying to Jacob here. When you do this, and you ask me to bless you, you need to know this is your life-changing event for you, And so he changes his name to Israel. So verse 29, then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. Tell me your name. He's saying, I want to know who you are. And he said, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. And so instead of Jesus pre-incarnate here, or God saying to him, here's who I am, he shows him who he is by giving him a blessing. And he blesses him on the spot. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So we realize there, Jacob has figured out who he was wrestling all night long. He's finally understood what he needed and who he needed. And it wasn't a bunch of animals, and it wasn't to be in charge, and it wasn't to have, all these wives and kids. It wasn't to have tons of possessions. It wasn't to have, the highest rank in the family. He needed God, and he figured it out finally. And so from then on, Jacob walks with this limp the rest of his life. And what do you think the limp did for him? It was an every second reminder that God was his God. It took the limp for him to get there. Had God not taken his hip out of the socket, I don't know how long they would have wrestled. But Jacob had to finally reach the place where his stubbornness benefited him instead of being a hindrance to him, because his stubbornness turned into, I'll not follow you, into I'll never not follow you. I'll always follow you. But I want everything you've got. I want the blessing that you can give me. So this limp is his reminder every day. And the same thing can happen for a lot of people, like we mentioned earlier, that struggle with this, and then finally something happens in their life. They go through some hard or terrible or horrible or just gut-wrenching experience, and it breaks them. It finally breaks them to the place that they say, this is where I was trying to get, but it took this to get me there. Maybe it's a physical ailment. Maybe it was a death in a family. Maybe it was just a hard, trying time, but it broke that person to the place that they said, I just didn't know how to get here, but now I'm here, and I figured it out. And so when I got finished studying, I started thinking about this name change thing, because this is not the only place that happens. Do you remember when we were studying Abraham? Well, he was Abram. And once he began to grow in his faith, God changed his name to Abraham, because he was no longer just going to be the father of a little family. He was going to be a father of this huge multitude. But he couldn't get there until he grew up, until he finally said, I'll give my full faith to following God. And another person I thought about, well, two actually, over in the New Testament, you think about Peter, okay? And Jesus changed his name, said, your name's going to be Peter. Remember, he was Simon. And when every time Simon would do something where he acted like his old self, Jesus would call him Simon. But as long as he was trying to follow and honor Jesus and follow and honor God, he called him Peter. And he said, your name's going to be Peter. This is your new identity, because you're going to be a rock for me. You're going to be one of the leaders in the church. And he turned out to be that very thing. But he had a new name. He was given a new identity. One more I thought of, and one may already come to your mind, is Paul. He was Saul. And Saul was the one who was persecuting Christians and trying to kill all the Christians. He was a religious zealot. He followed the law, that's it. But once he realized he needed Jesus, had his encounter on the road to Damascus, he is changed. And afterwards, it doesn't even tell us in the book of Acts who changed his name, but he had two names. He didn't want to be known as Saul anymore. He was different now. He knew if he went into a town and they said Saul's here, they'd be scared to death. He says, I don't want to be that. Call me Paul. I'm a new person. I don't want to be known as that old guy anymore. So those are just other places where we see how that means. But this, like I said at the beginning of our lesson, this whole wrestling match that Jacob has is so similar to the one-on-one experience that everybody has to go through of choosing whether to follow God or follow Satan. And some people wrestle for a long time, and others just give up real quick, and they hand their lives over to God really fast. They don't have a problem with it. They can see where He's good and blessing to them, and they're able to just switch quickly. But others have a tougher time, and Jacob was one of those people. Now after this, Jacob would be much different. He still had his flaws. He still was sinning. He's still going to make some mistakes. But as far as his encounter with God and understand who his God was, this was the spot for him where he had this one on it wasn't good enough that God blessed him with some animals, and it wasn't good enough that God blessed him with a dream. It took a wrestling match. It took God touching him physically and breaking him down to get him to where he needed him to be. But if Jacob was going to do what God had for his life, he was going to have to reach this place so that he could fulfill what God's will was for his life. Comments, thoughts you had, anybody?
I don't remember specifics, but after this, it switches between his names, dealing with Joseph and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he's called Israel, sometimes still called Jacob. So I need to go back and probably reread and
Yeah.
see why.
We're going to see some of that.
Each one's different. What's happening around him that he's called this one time and this another time.
That's right.
Still.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because at that point, I just thought from then on.
He's Israel, yeah.
But no.
Isn't it something how the whole nation of Israel comes off of his name? So, yep.
I wrote at the top, I said, let's see, I wrote, what is my hip something, like, not physically, but like,
Yeah.
for me, it's having to have control over everything, or being controlled, that's what
Yeah.
it is, and being stubborn, not wanting to give anything to God, and try to do it myself, so, I think everybody might have their own different,
Yep.
I'm gonna start asking myself that question.
That's right. Yeah, one of the people I was listening to, they said that very thing. So, what is it? What's your hip socket? Like she was saying, what's your ailment that God had to break you with? So, let's close with prayer. Perry, you want to pray for us?
Dear Lord, thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for allowing us to wake up this morning, come to your house to learn about you and worship you, Lord. And please be with us as we go throughout the rest of the week, and have us realize that even though we will still have struggles in this life, that we can always turn to you, and you will help lift us through these times. Please be with us as we go into the service. Have us